In this video, I'm going to share with you my 3 unpopular opinions about worship set lists. Coming up. Hey, Spencer here from leadingworshipwell.com. This is the place where we talk about how to lead yourself well, lead your church well, and lead worship well. So if you're interested in that, click subscribe down below, and let's get into it, because today we're talking about worship set lists. Talking about picking songs for your worship services. And I feel like I have some unpopular opinions about worship set lists that I want to share with you today. These aren't things that are like, I don't know, once you hear them and I explain them, you're going to be like, yeah, that makes sense. But I don't think that a lot of people think about these things, and so they say a lot of things that are contrary to them. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Before we get into it, I want to hear from you. What is your unpopular opinion about worship set lists? What's something that you think about picking worship songs that you feel like most people do not think that is true? Let us know down in the comments below, and I'll talk to you in a second. Thanks so much for leaving your unpopular opinions about worship set lists. I will rate them in the comments and respond to you if I don't agree with them. So thanks for leaving those down below. Let's get into what are my unpopular opinions about worship set lists. The first one is this. I believe it's actually okay to pick songs that have the same theme and put them beside each other in a worship set list. Have you thought about that before? Maybe this isn't like a conscious opinion that you have that you've thought about, but I know I used to feel it when I started leading worship up until like 5 years ago. I would always think to myself, we can't do that song. We just sang a song about the same exact thing. We just sang about the faithfulness of God at the beginning of our service. Why would I do another song right after it? Don't I need to be talking about something different? Don't we need to be singing about something different? And yes, obviously we want to have the full theological diet of the truth of God. But you also have 52 Sundays out of the year to make that happen. I think all too often we think of our worship gatherings on Sundays as like these one-off deals, and they were never meant to be these one-time events that live in a vacuum. God told us that we should be meeting together regularly, and if that is the truth, then we have 52 Sundays in a year to feast on the full theological buffet that God has to offer. And so, because I believe that it's okay to focus in on one specific attribute of God during a worship service, and you don't have to be like, well, I left out this part and this part and this part and this part. Well, guess what? God is infinite, and you are never going to be able to communicate every facet of his being in one 5-song worship set. And so, we can focus on one of those meanings, or one of those attributes of God, dive into it really deep on a Sunday, then pick a different one for the next Sunday, and so on and so forth. So I believe it's okay to pick songs with the same theme and put them beside each other in your set list, because it only deepens the exploration of that attribute or truth about God. And it doesn't hinder it. It's not like people in your church are thinking, oh, wait a second, like we just sang a song about this. Why is he doing another song about this? Or why did she pick another song about this? It actually deepens the conversation or the exploration of that truth during your worship service. So don't be afraid to put songs with the same theme beside each other. It's all right. Even if you picked 5 songs that were the same theme, that would be great, because you've got 52 Sundays in a year. My second unpopular opinion about worship set lists is that it's better to coordinate with your pastor in advance than it is for the songs to quote-unquote magically or supernaturally match up with what your pastor preached on that morning. I find it interesting when and I've seen this a couple times now, like, I watch a lot of church live streams because I like to stay on the pulse of what's going on in your churches. And I'm not only watching your churches, but I'm watching a lot of church live streams just because I like to be a student of worship leading and see what I can learn from them. But occasionally, I'll watch someone lead a worship set and they'll like do 3 or 4 songs at the beginning, and then the pastor comes up and they've got this big smile on their face and they're like, "Church, you won't believe this, but we didn't coordinate at all, and those 3 songs that the worship team just led, they fit in perfectly with what I'm about to speak on." And then they go into their message. It's like, if I was in the congregation, I'd be like, "Wait, you didn't coordinate at all? Like, isn't that your job? Aren't you supposed to be coordinating with the worship leader so that you can make sure that that happens, where you have a focused and unified vision for the service that you're about to lead?" Like, it's not like some awesome supernatural work of God. God used it, but that's not the normal way that we're supposed to function as worship leaders and pastors. We're supposed to be working together. And if it's so special that the songs before the message or coming out of the message line up perfectly with the message, why wouldn't we aim for that every week? It's not that difficult to do. The pastor can get me what they're preaching on in advance. I can pick songs that tie into that so that we have a unified vision for the service of where we're leading the people in our church. All right? So it's better to coordinate with your pastor in advance than it is for the songs to magically or supernaturally tie into whatever your pastor is preaching on. All right? That happy coincidence is not a virtue. All right? We can make it happen every single week. And I feel like that shouldn't be unpopular. And I don't think it's something that people consciously think about, like, "Man, I really hope my songs fit in with the pastor's message this week. That would be really cool if it did." I think it's just something that happens. But people don't realize you can plan your worship set list in coordinates with your pastor's message in advance. It doesn't have to be a magical occurrence, a magical coincidence that it happens. And my final unpopular opinion about worship set lists is that spontaneity in worship works best when elements of it are planned in advance. I'll say that again. Spontaneous worship works better when elements of it are planned in advance. And I know I've talked about this before on this channel, but I think spontaneous worship is great when we overflow in spontaneous praise of God, when we're leading worship and something happens in the room that we weren't expecting, and we follow the leading spontaneously of where the Spirit is leading our church in that moment. That's great. But I also think there's power in planning quote-unquote spontaneous moments before they happen. The spontaneous moment does not just have to be spontaneous in the sense that it happened and you were unprepared whenever you were leading worship for it to happen. The spontaneous moments can happen in your personal worship and preparation time before you lead on Sunday, and then you can take what was spontaneous in private and implement it in public when you're leading your church, and then it can be a spontaneous moment to the people who don't know that you've had it planned in advance, and it can seem just as special, but you've planned it in advance and you had a plan. It is always better to have a plan going into worship that you have planned during the week through the power of the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit doesn't just guide you on Sunday, He guides you all throughout the week. It's always better to have that plan than to enter into worship and just think the Holy Spirit is going to lead me in this moment, so I don't need to have anything prepared. Spontaneity in worship works best when we can plan certain elements of it in advance. What would that look like? Well, it would look like running through your songs before you lead them on Sunday, not just to learn them musically, but to worship through them, going on the journey before you lead others on the journey. And as you're working your way through that set list, you're thinking to yourself, what can I add to this to make it special? or you're just listening for the Spirit's guidance that says between song 2 and song 3, that might be a good time to repeat that bridge one more time. And you plan that in advance, and then you don't have to do it on Sunday, but you at least have the plan there, and maybe the Spirit guided you on a Thursday night and not just on a Sunday morning whenever you're leading worship. So, spontaneity in worship works best when certain elements of it are planned in advance. There they were, my 3 unpopular opinions about worship set lists. Once again, I want to hear from you. What are your unpopular opinions about worship set lists? Did any of those that I talk about resonate with you? Let me know down in the comments below. Also, before you go, I want to make sure if you're a worship team leader that you're able to lead your team well, because we don't just lead worship by ourselves on Sundays, but we usually have a team that serves alongside us, and we need to be diligent in leading them well. The best way to lead your team well is to have a consistent worship rehearsal time where you lead your team well, not just musically, but also spiritually and relationally as well. And that's why I put together the worship rehearsal blueprint. It's linked down in the description below. In that, I'll teach you everything that you need to know about leading the perfect worship rehearsal that makes sure that your team is led well musically, so they know the songs for Sunday, but also spiritually, so that they're always growing in their faith, and relationally, so they're always growing in their relationships with each other. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.